Now I'm good. All right, we're on the record, as they say. Thanks everyone for joining us for this very special presentation. I'm very happy to introduce Doug Roehler. Doug is with the Cannabis Strategy Unit with the CDC. We are also joined today by Hannah Fogarty. Hannah is our CDC program officer. And Hannah, would you just unmute and maybe turn your camera on for just a second so you can say hi to everyone?
Yes, hello. Yes, I am not camera ready, but I can say hello to everyone. So very happy to be here.
All right. Hannah was she was our point person to get this presentation together for us. So I am going to ask that everyone make sure that they are muted during the presentation. And I'm going to let Doug get started. I know he's got a lot of information to cover, and we will do our best to stay within our timeline and still allow time for questions and answers. So why don't we get started? There may be still some people joining us as we go, and we'll see how we do. Okay? Take it away, Doug.
Sounds great. Thank you so much. I'm very excited to be here today. My name is Doug Roehler. I'm an epidemiologist in the Cannabis Strategy Unit at CDC. The Cannabis Strategy Unit sits in the Division of Overdose Prevention, which is where the DFC branch lives. We're part of the Injury Center. Just a little bit of background on the Cannabis Strategy Unit. We are about 2.5 years old at this point. The agency recognized a need to develop a cannabis strategy unit as more and more states were hitting the legal marketplace. And there has been a bunch of cannabis work going on across the agency. There's been some work going on in the Office of Smoking and Health, some work in maternal child health, labs, Division of Adolescent Health, and it was just all over the place, like doing really good work. But we recognize the need to have a cannabis strategy unit to help coordinate all the cannabis work. So over the past couple of years, we've developed a strategic plan, which you can find online. And we are finally at a place where we're starting to do some really good work. I'll talk a little bit about our work. One of our primary goals is to provide technical assistance to states. States that have already legalized marijuana, states that are in the process, states that might be getting new laws in place relatively soon. So, this is a really nice opportunity to talk with you all about what we know about cannabis, what we don't know, the health effects, surveillance. After talking with Cynthia and Amy last week, there's a lot of information that I think you all will find interesting. So I'll dive right in. Just a couple logistics. I want to keep this conversation conversational and informal. So please interrupt me if you have questions. Put a question in the chat box. Interrupt me. I just do whatever you need to do in order to get my attention if you want to dive a little bit deeper into any of these topics. Alrighty. So let's start with, of course, we have our disclaimer here. The findings and conclusions of this presentation are those of the authors and do not necessarily represent the official position of the CDC. And then one other thing, I gave a presentation about a month ago, and I did it from home, and my internet went out right in the middle. So if there comes a point where I start to get choppy, please let me know so that I'll just turn my camera off and we'll try to troubleshoot. So what is cannabis? Basic question, but there's just a couple facets that I will just tease apart here. So the cannabis plant, the two main cannabinoids are CBD and THC. So THC is the psychoactive. It's what typically gives you the high. The product that you typically buy from dispensaries and whatnot has a combination of both THC and CBD. CBD is a non-psychoactive cannabinoid. There are over 100 cannabinoids in the cannabis plant. By definition, marijuana has high THC and low CBD. By the definition of the Farm Bill, is marijuana is a product that has higher than 0.3 THC, and hemp, which is legal in most states, has THC levels below 0.3. Marijuana, so that's product with higher than 0.3% THC, is currently federally a Schedule I drug, whereas hemp, as part of the Farm Bill, is legal to sell in almost every state. And we'll get more into that in a second. I'm going to present a couple slides now that just shows you how legislation has changed across the United States since 2000. So here we are in 2000. You can see that fully illegal throughout the majority of the United States. There were a handful of states that had medical marijuana. Medical marijuana was legal. 5 years later, pretty much the same. We have one state that allowed for low CBD or low THC and CBD products. 5 years after that, in 2010, you can see medical marijuana has expanded. Michigan and throughout the West and in the Northeast. 5 years later, 2015, dramatic difference here. You can see many states allow for low THC CBD. Many more states allowed for medical marijuana. And now Colorado and Oregon allow for non-medical adult use or legal non-medical adult use, also known as recreational. At CDC, we try to not use the terminology recreational marijuana. We try to use the terminology of non-medical adult use. Our rationale there is when you call something recreational, it seems that it's harmless. It's something that people just do for fun. There's no harm associated. So we try to stick with the terminology of non-medical adult use. 2020, drastically different map. Many more states have legalized. Many more states allow for medical use. And then the Farm Bill had passed at this point. So low THC and CBD is almost universal. And here we are today. You can see we've had tremendous expansion of cannabis laws across the United States over the past 22 years. As of today, we have 37 states that allow for medical cannabis use. 19 states and DC allow for non-medical adult use. And like I said, nearly every state except 2 allow for low THC or CBD. And I'm sure you all see this in your own state. You can buy CBD at the gas station. There's Delta 8 available. We'll get much more into that and later on in this presentation. So surveillance. So what do we know? Starting with medical use. So in every state, if you want to apply for a medical license, you have to list qualifying health conditions. Each state has their own qualifying health conditions, and they run the gamut in terms of what is allowable. This analysis from 2019, out of some folks from the University of Michigan, analyzed all of the data on applications for medical license. And you can see that the vast majority of medical cannabis license holders were for chronic pain. Next is multiple sclerosis, and then it goes into some other ones. Let's see, what else can we show here? 85% of conditions reported using medical cannabis for treatment had substantial evidence of needing or of that qualifying health conditions. So early on in medical cannabis legalization days, you had these. Oftentimes you had these clinics that you could go to with some sort of a health provider, and they could look at some paperwork and then just collect the money in terms of how much it costs or how much they were charging in order to grant you the medical license. Over time, that has changed substantially. So now you need it's a much more formalized process. So this analysis by the folks out of University of Michigan found that 85% actually had that qualifying condition. So that's quite an improvement from the early days. Looking at youth specifically, and then here we have some actual data from Wisconsin. Nationally, about 37% of high schoolers reported using marijuana ever in their lifetime, and these are data from 2019. You can see in Wisconsin, the number is a little bit less than that. So we have about 31% of high schoolers ever in their lifetime. And then in Wisconsin in 2019, about 20% of high schoolers reported that they've used marijuana in the past 30 days. We like to look at the past 30-day statistic because we feel it's a much more accurate statistic of current use. Ever in their lifetime, that could have been one time that they've tried it. As a teenager, they're just exploring, but that might not necessarily mean that they're a current user. So I think this past 30-day statistic is a little bit more accurate of current use. And as you would expect, the number of use goes up as age goes up among high schoolers. So here we're looking at, again, we're looking at youth, so 8th, 10th, and 12th graders. These are data from Monitoring the Future. This is a survey that asks about drug use and substance use across the United States. It's one of the best data sources available for substance use among high schoolers. We see here that among daily use, so those are youth reporting using marijuana on a daily basis.
Doug, you're breaking up. You're actually frozen.
And
right
then,
now.
Sorry?
Sorry, you're breaking up a bit. Could you, let's see if switching off your camera helps.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, great. But when we look from 2019 to 2020, daily use of marijuana among 8th and 10th graders is on the decline. So that's a good sign. Here are more data for Monitoring the Future, and these are the most recent data. Monitoring the Future started collecting data back in about 1976, and you can see that's the red line at top. Cannabis use was much higher than it is today. In about 1990, we see a substantial drop in cannabis use. And since 1992, the number has increased substantially, and then it remains pretty much steady with some rises. And then an interesting thing happened here. So in 2021, Monitoring the Future did a survey, and we see numbers drop substantially from 2020 to 2019. We wonder the accuracy of these data. Just because they changed their methods of the way that they collected data in 2021, just because of the pandemic. So this used to be an in-school survey, and then they changed it to an at-home survey. So it's going to be really interesting to see what the numbers are like in 2022 when they come out with the next round of data, to see if this is an actual decrease, which, some other data sources are showing that during the COVID-19 pandemic, cannabis use is dropping among youth. I personally, speaking on behalf of Doug Roehler and not the CDC, I have questions about this. I think what we know in particular about the COVID-19 pandemic, and this is true for both youth and adults, is if you already had a substance use problem prior to the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic made that substance use problem worse in most cases. There also have been some laws that have changed to allow for social distancing during the COVID-19 pandemic related to cannabis. For example, a lot of states that have non-medical adult use legislation changed laws to allow for curbside pickup at dispensaries. They've allowed for delivery services. They've allowed for telemedicine appointments in order to get medical license confirmed. I think all of these laws that were changed in order to allow for social distancing have potential public health consequences, specifically for youth. Because I think, you as an adult, you could be in your car going to the dispensary with your child in the passenger seat and doing curbside pickup. Or, it's possible that, and another change a lot for COVID-19 pandemic is in a lot of states, you have a cap about how much product you can purchase at one time. And in some of these states, they raised those thresholds in order to allow people to stay at home more and not have to go out into the public. So there have been in some states, people having much more product at home. And if the product is not properly secured, it could increase access for youth. I just want to check to see if my sound's being okay.
You're doing fine.
Okay.
Turning off the camera did the trick. Thank you.
Oh, okay, good.
Can I ask a question?
Yep.
So I share your skepticism. This is Deidre Atkinson. I share your skepticism, Doug, with why you think that the numbers have gone down. Is there any reason why the numbers really could have gone down? Do you see anything there that might back that up?
Yeah, I mean, I think an argument could be made. During the height of the pandemic, youth were at home. They weren't able to socialize with their normal peer networks. Parents were not allowing their youth to go out. That might result in less accessibility to product. So I think that's a possibility. I think it's also possible Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah, so the other issue is there could be some social desirability bias in these responses because these responses are now being done at home. And it could be that the parents are able to see the youth's responses. So I think I have personal skepticism here. But again, the 2022 results are going to be very telling.
And one more piece to this, Doug. What's the universe of survey here? How many youth are being surveyed?
I don't have those numbers in front of me, but it's a nationally representative sample. So I know that there was a drop off in 2021, but prior to 2021, these data have been very well respected in the field in terms of being representative of the United States youth in general.
Are we talking thousands of youth?
Yeah.
Okay.
Tens of thousands.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that speaks pretty highly.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. Great questions.
Could I ask a question as well?
Mm-hmm.
So on this graph, the percentage, is this daily use, past 30-day use, or ever tried?
This is in the past 12 months.
Ah, okay. Thank you.
Yep. And then this slide here just really illustrates that. So these are data from NISDA, which is run by SAMHSA. So these are looking at individuals 12 years and older. Again, it's a nationally representative sample, and it just shows that marijuana is the most widely used federally illicit substance in the United States. I think this comes as no surprise to you. This kind of just puts it into perspective about marijuana versus psychotherapeutic drugs. This also just shows that it continues to rise. So in 2019, we're at 17.5%. And then in 2020, we're at 17.9%. And this is a significant increase between the two. Again, these are looking at NISDA, breaking down by different age groups. These data are a little bit old, but I think in general, excluding at least what we know prior to COVID, because I have a slide later on that shows what we know about COVID, but I think this trend is generally true overall. When you look at youth cannabis use in general, we don't see much change from one year to the next. Sometimes it raises by a point here and there, but most often it remains pretty steady. So among 17, from 12 to 17-year-olds, I mean, this is for the United States in general. It stays relatively steady. From 18 to 25, we're seeing the numbers rise a little bit, but from 2017 to 2018, it stayed relatively level. But the main finding, which holds true, is where we're seeing use increase is among those 26 and older. And also really interesting is one of the fastest growing age populations that is increasing in terms of cannabis use are older adults, so 55 years and older. There are many different reasons why older adults may be starting to use or they're increasing their use. I think a lot of this has to do with these ever emerging new health claims about CBD, about how it can cure anything, and then and also the tinctures. So low dosage of THC can have some health effects, or at least that's what some of the literature is saying, and that's what some of the health claims are making. So it's interesting that we're seeing this uptick in 55 and older population. I know that this isn't necessarily the focus of the discussion here, but it's just something interesting to share. Related to that, I'm not sure if I have a slide on this or not, but I recently published a study that's actually this study. And so this looked at cannabis-related emergency department visits in the United States from 2016 to 2018. And this is for the population in general. So these are individuals that show up in the emergency department, and they had some sort of cannabis diagnosis code. So that means that, they could have showed up for a heart attack, and then they also claim that they use cannabis, or they showed up for a broken leg and they claim that, they were high when they broke their leg. So, for this study, there's not a direct relationship between cannabis and the reason why that they're in the emergency department. But, this looks at hundreds of thousands of emergency department visits. And, we do think that there's some sort of relationship between cannabis use and these emergency department visits. So, in 2018, there are 54.2 cannabis-related emergency department visits per 100,000 visits overall. This number increases dramatically, but we did a separate analysis that looks at just the health. We looked at patient characteristics between 2017 and 2018, and those adults that were 55 and older, they had the largest increases among any other age group. And then the second or the third highest increase by age group were those under the age of 10. So what does that mean? And this is where we're starting to a lot more research at CDC around, and this has to do with unintentional ingestions among youth. So this means, and again, I have a couple more slides on this later, but we think that it's youth who are getting into their parents or their guardians' edible products. And the way that these are packaged, it looks like candy. And they're consuming the products, they start acting strange, they become lethargic, and then their parents take them to the emergency department, and it turns out they got into their cannabis product. So, we're seeing this throughout the country in terms of this youngest age group, 0 to 10, 0 to 14, we're seeing large increases in unintentional ingestions. I say that with a caveat, and that's, it is not extremely common. So these rates are still pretty low for these cases, but they're getting higher and higher every year. That's a result of more and more product being available. I'll hold off there and save some thunder for the end. Any
Doug,
questions at this point?
Yeah, Doug, could I ask, when you looked at these data, did you break them out by adult use legal states versus non-adult use legal states? Were there more ingestion incidents by young children in states where there was more access, I guess is probably the way I would ask it.
Yeah, so we did not in this study. What we did break it out by census region. And what we found, which I think is interesting, is the West Census region has the largest concentration of non-medical adult use states, but they've also had that status for the longest period of time. So what we found is in the census regions with the more recent legalization changes, that's where we saw the highest increases. In the West, we actually saw, we didn't see large increases among this. So what that makes us sort of, the conclusion we came there is after you have an established marketplace, your laws are constantly changing in order to better protect the public health. And we think that even though like they're still rising in the West, we don't see as large of increases, and we think it's just because they have better policies in place.
And excellent, thank you. And we have a question in the chat. Deidre is asking if you know how this graph of cannabis-related ED visits compares to the use of alcohol being the reason for an ED visit.
That's a great question. I'm writing that down, Deidre. I do not know.
So I would think you'd be able to get the prevalence rate for alcohol-related ED visits. That I'm sure somebody's done that.
Yeah.
It's a good question.
Yeah, that is a great
Thanks, Deidre.
Okay. So now let's talk about modes of use. So I'm going to go through these as best as I can, and I don't know where everybody's familiarity is with these different modes of use. So I'll just go through them. So let's start with combustible products. So we have joints, blunts, bongs, and bowls. These are the most. For combustible product, you use flower, so herb, which is the green that you see in these top two pictures. This is the most commonly flower is the most commonly used cannabis product. It's one of the quickest ways to get high. After you smoke, you feel effects within 5 minutes, if not immediately. Vaporizers, which I have, yes, my next slide is on vaporizers, so I will hold off on that. Edibles, these include gummies, brownies, cookies. This is where after you have a gummy, effects it usually takes about an hour to start feeling the high. edibles, in my opinion, is one of the most dangerous because the risk of poisoning is the highest. And I use the term poisoning in quotes just because people do not die from cannabis use. But what happens is someone will take a gummy, they expect to feel immediate results. They don't feel immediate results. They take another gummy, still not feeling results. Then they take another gummy, and then next thing you know, they are extremely intoxicated. I think one of the benefits of legalization is in a lot of states, the products, the edibles are clearly marked in terms of the dosage, so the concentration of THC or CBD, and then in a newer trend in some of these states is it will actually say how long it takes for you to feel an effect. So I think that's one of the benefits of legalization is you know what you're taking and you know what to expect. And then, but one of the issues that we have with edibles is, especially in states that have not legalized, is, you know, you'll have product that people will buy off the black market, and you don't necessarily know the THC concentration of that product. And some states you'll have them sell a edible product like a sucker, for example, and the sucker will say 100 milligrams of THC, which is a lot. And a sucker isn't necessarily something that you can break apart, whereas like a gummy or brownies or cookies, you can clearly break them apart so that, you know, if it says it's 100 milligrams, you know, you can do some rough math. And if I take this big of a piece, I expect to have 10 milligrams of THC. I also heard a story of somebody buying a truffle, and it was like a 50 milligram truffle. Well, you can't break up a truffle. You know, you can, but that sort of defeats the purpose of the enjoyment of a truffle. So I like states like California, they've gotten better and better about putting restrictions on what can be sold in marketplaces. So in California, for example, I think they have either a 5 milligram or 10 milligram maximum for individual pieces. And then there's a push for having those individual servings to be individually wrapped. So there's no mistake in terms of how much you're taking. Next, I'll move on to drinks. I'm less familiar with these, but I know that they're being sold in legal marketplaces. So you can buy sodas that are infused, syrups and tinctures and elixirs or sprays that you can spray on your tongue. Again, I'm less familiar with these, and they're just less common. Dabbing. So dabbing is something that is pretty frightening in my opinion. So this involves putting a highly concentrated THC product. So for example, like THC wax, also known as crumble or shatter or resin, on some sort of a metal object. Normally it's like a metal nail. And then you use a blowtorch to heat this THC product, and it vaporizes the product. And then you quickly inhale the vapor through this like cylinder called a dab ring. So basically what happens is you inhale the vapor from this highly concentrated product extremely quickly. And you get extremely intoxicated in no time at all. So there are many risks associated with this. Not excluding burns. Like we have learned about a lot of people showing up to the emergency department because you're using a blowtorch, and oftentimes you're intoxicated when you use the blowtorch, or you have this metal object such as a ring that is extremely hot and you drop it and you burn yourself. But there's also a risk of psychosis. We're learning more and more about these highly concentrated products, THC products leading to psychosis, acute psychosis. Then we're also seeing other effects, such as people who dab as their primary form of cannabis use, leading to cannabis use disorder, increased tolerance, leading to withdrawal symptoms. It's pretty frightening. It was becoming very popular about 5 years ago. I think with the emergence of vaporizers, it's just becoming less popular. So, now you have a very not great overview of dabbing, but hopefully you're starting to get the picture. There are other ways that other modes of use, such as pills. So pills that are infused with different tinctures, different concentrates of CBD and THC oils. There's lotions that you can put on your skin. There's transdermals that you can put on your tongue. I will stop there to see if there's any questions about these products, and then we'll go into vaporizers.
So Amanda commented in the chat that dispensaries are also good about telling people about the delayed effects of edibles and cautioning people to slow down and wait. And I think that's absolutely true. But it makes me ask a question sort of adjacent to that, and that is there, because this isn't federally regulated, but at the state level, are there regulations in states that, I understand they do dosing, but is there sort of packaging language that says if don't use these more, use them, allow X amount of time between doses or something like that?
Yeah, and thanks for that comment, Amanda. And I would say that the majority of the time that's true, but I would not say that that's 100% that's not true 100% of the time. And I think that depends on the state. It depends on the dispensary. One other thing that we saw during the COVID-19 pandemic is there was less regulation or less enforcement of regulation, just because the folks who are in charge with going out to dispensaries and making sure that they're following these protocols, they were just staying at home for one reason or another. It seems to be back at 100% capacity, but they do try to do these like undercover enforcements to make sure that they're following the rules, but it's just not always the case. Getting into the other question, yes, there are packaging restrictions and packaging requirements in every state, but it's up to each state in terms of what that language looks like, how they're packaged, what are the warnings that are on the different labels. So yes, one state might say, allow this amount of time. Another state won't have any sort of language related to that.
Amanda replies that Illinois products, because of course that's our closest. We're 45 minutes away. That's our closest source in Wisconsin. Illinois products, she believes, have labeling about time delays, at least as far as she knows.
Yeah.
Drew Lakuta also has a question asking who makes or how does one obtain the resin, crumble, shatter, wax products for dabbing.
Yeah.
And Drew, if I didn't ask that question correctly, please unmute and ask it correctly.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah, it's a good question. So I don't know who makes it. I don't know the process for making it. I do know that you can purchase the products in dispensaries. And I think in nearly, I don't know. So I know that there are some states that I think limit what types of products that you can sell, but I think in nearly every non-legal adult use state, you can buy resin and shatter. I'm less familiar about crumble. And to be honest with you, I'm not sure of the difference between crumble and shatter. Okay, so vapes, also known as e-cigarettes, e-cigs, vape pens, e-hookahs. I think vape pens and e-cigs are and vapes are the most widely used terms for this. So just a very quick overview of what is an e-cigarette. So I have a couple different pictograms at the bottom here to show what they may look like. But initially they were used for heating a liquid that contained nicotine, and nicotine was flavored by different chemicals to make an aerosol. And then, sorry for the typo here, but the aerosol is inhaled into their lungs. There's also there's a risk of harm for bystanders, because bystanders could breathe in the aerosol. Like I said, it was initially used for nicotine and different nicotine flavors, but they can also, e-cigarettes can be used to deliver THC and other drugs. Something interesting is between 2018 and 2019, monitoring the future. So that was the survey that I talked about previously. They saw the second largest 1 year increase among any substance in their 45-year history for THC vaping. And this was among 12th graders. So in 2018, it was 7.5% of 12th grade respondents did THC vaping. And then the following year, it jumped to 14%. So this is the second largest 1 year increase ever recorded. There are major health concerns here, and it's mainly meant to be, so let me go into the next slide to talk about the health consequences. Excuse me, my 19 months old son started summer camp last week, and he brought home a virus, not COVID. So we're all sick, and then it turned into a sinus infection. So fun times over here. So let me quickly talk about this study. So this is a small study of first-time or infrequent users. Researchers showed that marijuana inhaled through a vape device, as opposed to just like smoking a joint, produced a more powerful high, and often with more powerful side effects than the smoked version. So participants smoked and vaped marijuana at 3 different THC doses. So we have 0 THC dose, so that's the blue line, 10 milligrams of a THC dose, which is the orange line, and then 25 milligrams of THC dose, so that's the dark blue line. So 0 served as the control in this blinded study. They completed, after they smoked or vaped, they completed the drug effects questionnaire, which is a self-rated drug effects of score of 0 to 100. The survey assessed feeling sick, anxious, hungry, sleepy, restless, if they experience heart racing, dry mouth, dry eyes, memory impairment, and coughing. And then the results are showed in this graph. So overall, at the same level of THC, vaping led to higher blood concentrations of the chemical than smoking, as well as higher levels of cognition and psychomotor impair, and a higher incidence of adverse effects such as vomiting, anxiety, hallucinations, and feeling of paranoia. So researchers suspect that the stronger effects observed with vaping are because none of the material is lost. So when you light a joint, some of the material is lost through the combustion, but none of the material is lost in vaping through the device that it's in. So there's not an equivalence between vaping and smoking marijuana at the same amount of THC. So given that adolescents are more likely to vape than smoke, this is problematic for a lot of reasons. So we're seeing that basically vaping is more intoxicating even at the same level of THC, and by quite a margin. so one of the topics that I was asked to talk about is vaping, because apparently you guys are, I'm sure, seeing vaping in your community amongst your teens. It's something that we all recognize as an issue. Another issue related to vaping is the Valley outbreak that happened just before the COVID-19 pandemic. Because when you have these vape cartridges, other substances are added to other liquids are added into the cartridges in order to fill space, to add different flavors. And it turns out some of those substances that were added, from what we found with the vitamin K substances, that is not something that should be vaporized. And once it got into lung, it's caused severe lung damage. Those were, it wasn't necessarily the THC being inhaled that caused the Valley, it was these additives. I think most of these products were through the black market. But we're concerned about a potential, like, when is the next Valley outbreak going to happen, as distributors are trying to make newer product, make new flavors. So it's something that we're all concerned about. And I'll pause there if there's any questions related to this.
All right, this is Cynthia. I have my data geek hat on. I am looking at blood levels, and it's, am I reading this right, that the blood levels are lower for vaping?
BL is baseline.
Oh, baseline. All right, never mind.
Yep. So the x-axis is time.
Okay.
So 1 hour, then 2 hours. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Right. And did anyone, and I know this is from 2018 when we weren't seeing this either, but our current local condition is that very often kids who have a vaping device have both THC and nicotine cartridges with them. I'm sure they weren't asking that question in 2018 because we were just figuring out that kids were vaping in 2018. But do you know if there are studies in process that are looking at that prevalence?
I'm sure. I'm not familiar. I'm actually not familiar with current ongoing research in this field. I will say that this was a lab controlled study. So these were, this was controlled in a lab. But you also mentioned when we had a call last week that, remind me what you said about police pulling over teens.
Oh, so because part of the work that I do in this thing that people think is retirement, but isn't, and everyone else understands this is funny, but I retired and now I'm working again, but I work for the municipal court. And so I am in the municipal proceedings for all juveniles. And we are finding that when kids are getting pulled over most often in, usually in a traffic stop, sometimes for curfew, sometimes for doing something stupid in the car, usually not, sometimes because they're parked in a parking lot. And I actually just reviewed data on all of this so I can speak to it with some intelligence. But in every instance that I could find, kids who had a nicotine vaping device with them in their car when they were pulled over for another reason, curfew violation or a traffic infraction, they had cartridges with both substances in them every instance for the last year and a half.
Wow. Yeah.
So it's a study. It's a really tiny study, and it's a really, and we consider it just a local condition, but I would love to know at some point I'm sure at some point someone's going to ask that question, because I think it's probably happening in other places. I know it's happening in other places in Wisconsin, because we have heard that from our colleagues who are also doing DFC work. But we do know that that's part of what we're trying to figure out, how to wrap our arms around here.
Yeah. It's fascinating and scary. Okay, let's get into perceived risk of harm and THC concentrations. So another thing that we're seeing is the perceived risk of harm of cannabis use is on the decline. Again, according to Monitoring the Future survey, perceived risk of harm among high schoolers of frequent marijuana use has steadily been falling. So I apologize that this graph is hard to see, but about 1991, 1992, that's when we were seeing the greatest risk of perceived risk of harm. And then the number is steadily falling all the way until 2021. Again, these are among 8th, 10th, and 12th graders, but we're seeing this for all age groups for in most cases. So we're seeing that the perceived risk of harm is decreasing, but then we also have THC concentration increasing. So in the 1980s, on average, the THC concentration was approximately 4% on average in the products. And then today, and I pulled this up the other day, I was looking at menus of dispensaries in Chicago. It was difficult to find flower that was less than 20% THC. And then when you try to look at extracts and edibles, I couldn't find any that contain less than 50 to 90% THC. A 2020 study out of Colorado found that 93% of all the products sold had over 15% THC. So compare that to the 1980s, which was 4% of THC. So I say all this because the product that was available when you may have been in high school or college, speaking to the adults here, is drastically different than the product that is available today. So when you tie in what we know about the rising THC concentration with this decreased risk of harm, it's setting us up for sort of the perfect storm. And then that leads us into, what do we know about the health effects of high potency THC? So this was a 2017 report out of the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine. The different federal agencies were in the work for updating this report, but the known health effects for high potency or highly concentrated THC is increased anxiety and paranoia, acute psychosis, cannabis hyperemesis syndrome. So that's when you have continuous vomiting as a result of your cannabis use, decreased blood flow through the veins, and increased intoxication, which results in potentially increased injury. And then, just not looking specifically at high potency or highly concentrated THC, we also know really well about other acute effects of cannabis use. It leads to impaired memory, learning, and attention, impaired coordination and reaction time, which is particularly concerning among drivers. Again, acute psychosis and paranoia, altered judgment, increased likelihood for risky behaviors. We also know longer-term consequences. So longer-term cannabis use can result in cognitive development and related outcomes, cannabis use disorder, increased reliance on other substances, respiratory impairments and distress, poor pregnancy outcomes such as lower birth weights, and then mental health outcomes including social anxiety and depression. And then let's talk really quickly about the health effects related to youth. Difficult thinking and problem solving, problems with memory and learning, reduced coordination, difficulty maintaining attention, problems with school and social life, all characteristics that are really important for youth. And given the development of youth, you know, a lot of youth already have issues related to these things, but they're just they're just made much worse if they're using cannabis. Increase of depression, social anxiety, temporary psychosis, again, driving impairments, problems with addiction. I will say that what we know about the science related to cannabis use in youth is that the earlier you initiate and the more frequent that you use, the more likely these problems are going to develop. I'll stop there to see if we have any questions related to what I just covered.
Miranda is asking, it says the following: I know tobacco use during teenage years increases the risk for future addiction to other substances. Is that true for cannabis as well? And Doug, I did want to tell you that I have I put a link to the National Academy's report in the chat.
Great. Yes, the answer to your question is yes. Often people will call marijuana a gateway drug. I really do not like that term because not everybody who uses cannabis in their youth leads to using other substances. And not everybody who uses other substances started with cannabis. But what we know is that if you use cannabis at an early age, your risk for using other substances or developing some sort of an addiction with both cannabis and other substances are increased later in life. Any data regarding the reversibility of these effects? Yes. So if you stop using cannabis, all of these health effects decrease substantially. We do, and I'll get into this more in a couple slides, but from the science that we know, these are not made permanent. I also think it's important to talk about the health benefits of cannabis. Again, the science that we know is limited, and I'll talk about that just for a second. Cannabis, as I mentioned, is a Scheduled I drug, which means it is very difficult to do research on it. It's if a university wants to study cannabis, they have to jump through many hoops in order to just obtain access to the product. What a Schedule I drug means is there is no known health benefit of the product. And so the cannabis plant overall, there's no known benefit according to the people who deem it a Schedule I drug. So even though cannabis has been around for hundreds of years, we are still so behind in terms of what we know about the health benefits and the health risks and who's using, what are they using, how are they using, just because the Scheduled I designation has made it so difficult to do this research. With that being said, there have been FDA approved drugs that have been approved. So I list the three here. These are synthesized THC, so it's THC that is made in a lab, and then it's highly concentrated CBD. So it gets the Schedule I designation because these are just individual cannabinoids, or they're synthesized cannabinoids, but the way that it's written is they're not seeing a benefit for the entire plant. They're minor technicalities, but they're really important and they mean a lot. So there's also been promising or mixed scientific evidence for pain relief, nausea relief from chemotherapy, relief of symptoms for multiple sclerosis and relief from some rare seizure disorders. So Marinol and Sesamet they counteract nausea from chemotherapy and stimulate appetite from HIV/AIDS related wasting syndrome. And then the Epidiolex is the anti-seizure medication for a rare seizure disorder. And as I said earlier, like these four promising or mixed scientific evidence, as I mentioned at the beginning, much more work is needed with stronger studies designs in order to definitively say that cannabis use results in pain relief. We're just not at a point there to say that with 100% certainty. So what don't we know? So in 2019, the Health and Human Services released a report on the state of cannabis surveillance in the US, included these 10 gaps in surveillance. And so we need more information on these high potency products. We need more information on the variations of THC concentration, so THC to CBD. How these new modalities of use, how they affect health. We need to learn more about more frequent use patterns and the lack of knowledge about amount of use. We need better data on states and localities. We also need better data on shifting reasons for use and perception of risk. So why is perception of risk decreasing, for example? We need to better understand why medical use is changing, and what's the relationship between the provider and the patient. We need better data we need more timely data on cannabis use. One of the problems that we have is these different surveys come out and then we don't get data back for a couple of years. And that's just the nature of these surveys. We need more data on the life circumstances and opportunities to intervene when cannabis use becomes problematic. And then we need better data on linking products marketed toward youth. So these are, this is just a quick list of some of the issues that we're facing, some of the things that we're starting to study. We have a long way to go in order to get a better grasp of cannabis use and the health effects and what we know and what we don't know. But this is just a quick list of 10 that HHS put out a couple years ago. And then I'll end with the emergence of THC isomers. So let's talk about Delta 8. So THC is a cannabinoid found in the cannabis plant, which we've already talked about. It's the psychoactive. It's one of the most common psychoactive cannabinoids. THC, also known as it's also referred to as Delta 9 THC. There's over 100 different cannabinoids, isomers, including Delta 8. So Delta 8 exists in the cannabis plant, but it does not exist in the levels high enough that it could actually be extracted from the cannabis plant and consumed. So, I'll put a pause there. CBD, as we've talked about, it's the non-psychoactive it's one of the non-psychoactive cannabinoids in the cannabis plant. So what we know is that CBD can be synthetically converted into Delta 8 THC. So it has to be done in a lab. If there's a solvent added, it's a process. Given Delta 8 is, when it hits the market, it's coming from CBD and not from THC. It's allowed to be sold in states that allow for CBD sales. the issue that we have is that Delta-8 THC is intoxicating. Unless Wisconsin has specifically passed legislation that bans the sales of Delta-8, you can certainly go out and find Delta-8 and you can take it and you will get high. I know I can go about between my house and the CDC campus, there are about 8 different places that I could stop to buy Delta-8 in Georgia, even though Georgia does not allow for non-medical adult use. This picture my colleague took, we have this thing in Atlanta called the Beltline. It's a productive walkway. It's really popular. There's a hemp shop that is right on the Beltline, and you can see here they're advertising all over the place. The problem, I think one of the major problems that we have with Delta-8 is people will take Delta-8 thinking that it's just a CBD product. It's just something that is going to relieve their backache or it's going to help them sleep. But in actuality, if you take Delta-8, you're going to get high. And if you take Delta-8, you can, not knowing that it's an intoxicating product, you can go out and drive and then all of a sudden become impaired. Or you can show up or you can take it and not know what's going on. And then you show up in the emergency department because you're not feeling right. Another example that I'll share, I'll get back to this slide. My wife is a pediatric ICU doc, and she had this, this is not the exact situation, I'll read it, but this is not the exact situation that happened to her, but she had 2 sisters show up in the pediatric ICU because they had gotten into their parents' Delta-8 supply, and it was actually these nerd ropes. The 2 sisters got into the nerd ropes, and it was like 200 milligrams of Delta-8, and they became intoxicated. They became lethargic. Their blood pressure or their heart rate decreased. The parents didn't know what was going on. They took them in, and they had to be intubated. Turns out they were totally fine, but this is one of the issues that we have, not only with Delta-8, but with cannabis products in general, is if these products are not secured properly, or like in a state like Georgia, where there's no regulation in terms of how Delta-8 products should be packaged, they're packaged in a way that is appealing to youth. They're marketed toward the young to make it look like they're candies. So this is another example of something that can happen with these Delta-8 products, especially in these states that do not allow for non-medical adult use. And then I'll just go back real quickly to this slide. These are some additional novel cannabinoids that are hitting the market. It's Delta-8 or Delta-10, which it's not as psychoactive as Delta-8. And then we have THC acetate, which is more psychoactive than Delta-9. So, this is just something to keep an eye on. The federal government, the FDA is still, they haven't really come out strongly one way or the other in terms of the DEA hasn't come out in terms of, are these legal? Are they not legal? We're still waiting on some rulings from them. But it's all things to keep an eye on and things to be concerned about. And I will stop there.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So asking for a friend, but someone who went to a dispensary who was told by the people working there that THC and CBD kind of work in tandem. Like if the product has all THC and no CBD, it's not going to be quite as effective as a product that has mostly THC and a little bit of CBD. And the reverse they said was true too. A totally CBD products will be more effective if a little bit of THC is included. Is there any data to support that kind of a claim? You're muted.
Yeah, I don't know. So I know that there's some research that shows, so we know that THC is psychoactive, CBD is non-psychoactive. So I think it's rare to see in dispensaries like a 100% pure THC product. You're often going to have some CBD in it, and I think that I think that's partly to just not make it so overpowering. But I don't know about the reverse. I don't know. I have not heard that CBD is more effective with a little bit of THC in it. That's concerning to me, specifically for those people who want to, get some sort of a health benefit from CBD product and not test positive. But yeah, I have not heard that before. But it 100% potentially could be true.
Other questions? Just jump in, unmute yourselves and ask away. Not seeing anyone unmuted.
I don't know if Drew is still here, but he asked a question, any data regarding the reversibility of these effects?
Yeah, so that's if you stop using cannabis, then the known health effects of cannabis use are reversible. At least that's what the science says to date. I will say that what we're most concerned about is the long-term effects of highly concentrated products, because the research, these products just have not been around long enough for us to really know the long-term effects of highly concentrated THC. But from what we know thus far, the health effects are reversible if you stop using.
And just a reminder for everyone who's listening, Wisconsin status, Delta 8 and Delta 10, certainly Delta 8. I'm going to waffle on Delta 10, but I think both of them are available widely in the state at gas stations, grocery stores, and so forth. So certainly Delta 8 is widely available. I have not seen as much Delta 10. It's available in a few places. I think the synthesis is a little harder, to tell you the truth. There's not as much interest in that, but there is Delta 8 widely available in the state. And not, Amy, help me out here. I think there are Delta 8 edibles in the state. Am I right?
That is correct.
Yeah, and the other thing that I'll say about that is, as I mentioned, additives have to be, solvents have to be added in order to make these products, Delta 8 products. These are not regulated by the FDA. So we don't know what is being put in there. We are seeing a large uptick in people who take Delta 8 and have adverse events. There has even been one death, of a pediatric death that we know of thus far. So without, and this is, I think this is true. This is true overall. I'm not advocating for or against legalization of anything, but when you don't have oversight for these products, it's really difficult to regulate what is being put into these products. The FDA did send out some letters to some big companies related to Delta 8, I think 2 or 3 weeks ago, because these companies were putting health claims on the packaging. And the FDA put out a cease and desist letters for these Delta 8 companies.
Could I jump in? I've been thinking a lot about Amanda's question, and from a practical point of view, let's say you have a CBD product that you're taking for a health benefit. It has a little bit of THC in it, and it's enough THC that you don't get overtly high, but you do feel a little bit better just because it has THC in it. So how the hell are you going to know whether or not you need a little bit of THC to make CBD work? The THC just makes you feel better because that's what it does. So it's a practical point.
Yeah, yeah, and I think in terms of the health benefits of both CBD and THC, I think it really depends on the individual. I think that it might help some people, it might not. It might be a placebo effect, it might not. This really gets to, we need a lot more research in this space, and we need to be able to do that research. And the circumstances, the way they are, that we're improving. The government is allowing for there to be more research in this space, slowly but surely. And there's a bill that is sitting in the Senate, I think it's called, I don't want to mess up the name, but it's specifically allowing for more research to be done in this space. But it's just difficult, and now we're relying on, she said this, he said that. Yeah, we still have a long ways to go.
Yeah, this is, you may again not know the answer to this question, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, so please just say not my area. But as you were talking about medical use and how long medical use has been around, I wondered if health insurance in states that allow for medical use, are there health insurance plans in California, say, that cover all or part of your marijuana, of your THC, or is that totally out of pocket? Just curious.
Yep, good question. As it stands right now, it's totally out of pocket. Okay. But with that being said, if you do have a medical card or medical license, most of these states will waive the taxes, or the taxes will be much lower.
Okay.
Doug, how about driving? What do we know about THC cannabis use and driving now? We have all of these states where it is legal, and then to nuance that, driving in teens.
Yeah, it's a really tough subject, because it is so hard to measure. So the police are getting better at being trained in order to identify people who are impaired through. So they're trained to do, people who are under the influence of drugs, but there's no sort of roadside test that you can do that's widely available to test for THC. Given what we know about the effects of cannabis with reaction times and coordination, we know that, and we know that it's much more risky to drive if you're high. We also know that marijuana plus alcohol is more risky than one of the substances alone. But you find one study that shows, like, once it was legalized in Colorado, insurance claims for crashes went up by X amount. And then you see another study from a different state that shows the opposite. So the science is still all over the place. Our transportation safety team at CDC, they're working in this space pretty diligently, and I'm pretty sure they found some relationships between cannabis use and traffic crashes. But intuitively, it totally makes sense. It's just the way that the data are analyzed, and the marijuana and hemp industries are very powerful these days. So yeah, I to be frank, I'm not sure what the current research is, but you are impaired if you are high.
Yep. To your ending point, who is the cannabis industry today compared to, like you were talking about, 1980s, 1990s? So in the legalized states, can you explain the business, how big it is?
I can't. I'm gonna put I'm putting an organization in the chat. So this is the Cannabis Regulators Association. So this is an organization that was stood up a couple years ago, and they are they're the national organization that deals with cannabis regulators, and they work closely with industry. See, this is not CDC space. Like we're about the science, so we try to stay out of that field.
Yeah, and for us trying to have good conversations with teens, it's brain development. If you can address anything there, what are you seeing? Is there in the research you have in terms of impacts on the developing teen brain?
I don't have much to say there besides what I've already said in terms about memory, cognition, coordination. There's been some research that shows that early and frequent cannabis use decreases gray matter in the brain. But what does that mean? What's the long-term effects of that? I think that's not my field house at all. But again, there's just a lot more science that needs to be done. Yeah, so I can't really speak too much in terms of what happens to the brain besides what I've already talked about.
No, it's a fantastic overview for us to kind of understand the landscape. What are you hearing in terms of more states having the conversation about legalization? Your maps obviously jumped significantly.
Yeah, and they're going to continue. What we saw in the past couple of years in the Northeast is once New York flipped, all the surrounding states around New York have flipped, and if they haven't flipped yet, they're going to. One interesting thing we saw with COVID is as the economy was shutting down, a lot of states started to think about turning to legalize cannabis in order to get the tax dollars. And so it's not a red issue, blue issue. I think the trajectory is simply going to continue. If not just from their community members wanting it, but also from an economic standpoint. I don't necessarily know that I can't really speak to how great of an economic impact it would be, but I think the one thing that I will mention is the newer states that are legalizing, they're having a very big health equity component attached to it. So those communities that have been disproportionately affected by the war on drugs they're becoming more likely to get licenses in order to start up their own cannabis dispensaries. They're able to get into the cannabis business and allow for greater economic opportunity. So those sorts of things are, where it's really nice to see. These automatic expungements. So Rhode Island just passed their non-medical adult use law 2 weeks ago or something like that. And written in their bill was automatic expungement for those people who have a criminal record as a result of cannabis possession. So those are the sorts of things that are really exciting to us. But right now they're in the minority. In a lot of states that have expungement laws in place, you have to jump through hoops in order to actually get it expunged from your record or for you to be released from jail. There's still tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people in jail for cannabis possession. Maybe not hundreds of thousands, but definitely tens of thousands.
All right. I think unless anyone else has more questions, I see that people are leaving because it's hard to break away, but people have to get on with their lives. Doug, thank you so much for this. This has been excellent information. We really appreciate it. To those of you who are still left and who are still in my coalition, please watch your emails. We will send out an announcement when this recording is available and when Doug's slides are available to you. And we will also, I'm going to include information about an upcoming virtual conference on cannabis policy that's coming up in September that I just learned about. So I will put that in emails coming forward. And last but not least, if you watch your emails, I'll put more information in, but we have Summerfest coming up. And they need volunteers, especially for ID checking. So it's one of our other problems, right, people? So thank you all for being here. If you have a last minute question and you want to jump in, please do. We have about 2 minutes left. I'm not seeing anybody unmute.
Yeah, I'll just say if you guys have additional questions or need more resources, you know how to get a hold of me. So I'm happy to at least connect you to the right person.
Excellent. Thank you. I'm going to stop recording.